Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Thursday. Battered little BookTube tradition where a few BookTubers read poetry on Thursday. I urge you all to do it. Here, I've got a baby going crazy. Let's get all the breakables out of the way. It drives her nuts that I'm sitting on a chair instead of on the bed so that she can lean on me or sprawl on top of me. It drives her nuts, makes her bite things. She's biting the blankets and pillows now. She'll calm down. I have been using for Poetry Thursday for all of the year, and I'm going to continue for the rest of the year. I'm going to read from this 20th century American poetry, big, heavy. Really can't appreciate the heft of this thing. Big, heavy poetry anthology that I found that is all about. It chronicles the degradation of a whole body and nationality of poetry that I have hated for a long time, which is the American poetry in the 20th century. It starts off normal. It starts off as poetry, and then in 1956, it immediately falls off a cliff and becomes the weird, navel-gazing, obscenity-filled, totally incomprehensible vanity fest that it is today. Virtually worthless as a genre, and, no coincidence, it completely lost its popular readership. No one reads poetry anymore. Effetes do, and people who like to post on Twitter that they read poetry, they do, or if they know somebody, or if they've slept with a poet. But as a popular genre, no. Frida, could you calm down, little girl? You're going to have a heart attack. I'm just sitting on a chair, that's all. Okay, never mind. Anyway, I want to get her used to this. That's all. Anyway, this book is slowly moving chronologically toward that breaking point. And I want to see if it can renovate that breaking point for me. Maybe restore some of that poetry to me. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're still in the first half of the 20th century. And we're reading a poet today. It's very much akin to the poet that we read last Thursday. There are things that you have to watch out for in an anthology. Now, this anthology came out when? Because actually the year of publication does make a big, big difference. This came out in 2004. So this is still well clear. You have to, around 2012, 2011, 2012, something like that. By 2014, in full swing. By 2016, the rule. And by 2018, no exceptions to the rule. But in 2004, you're still early enough so that they'll just be faint flickers of censorship, of ideological censorship, of putting together an anthology that is not designed to present representative or even great 20th century American poetry, but rather is designed to right 2,000 or 5,000-year-old social ills. So we don't care about the poetry at all. We only care about the genitalia of the poet, the politics of the poet, the skin color of the poet. That's all that matters. We are trying to redress old balances. They haven't been redressed in 5,000 years. It falls to us, the anthology editors of some dumb book, to finally write these scales. Of course, that is ridiculous, but that is all. That is the only reason why anthologies are made today. It's the only rule that guides them, and it excludes a lot. It makes them travesties. It makes them worthless. But 2004, you're still early for that, so you just have to watch it a little. You have to be a little wary. In 2004, the form that it usually took was not so much melanin count in someone's skin or trolling through their social media posts in order to find out who they sleep with. That is the only thing that editors constructing anthologies do today. But in 2004, that would have been almost non-existent. The only thing that you have to watch out for in 2004 is, are people plucking third or fourth rate poets out of the landscape, out of the wood pile, in order to have their table of contents have more women. It'd be the typical thing. We saw that last week. You pick a deservedly obscure, rightfully forgotten female poet because you want more women on your table of contents. And today is another example of that, not of that, but of another ill that anthologies, you have to watch out for in anthologies, which is that sometimes the anthologists will have a cause, a tub they want to thump. And you have to watch out for that too, because it's almost never true. It's an indulgence. If you are an editor of an anthology, you get to stick in, once in a while, a few little pet writers of your own. They don't belong in the august company of the rest of the anthology, and you must know that on some level. Certainly your collaborators know that. But you're doing the work. You're putting in the long hours as an editor. This is an excellent anthology, so you get a mulligan now and again, and that is what today's poet is. And the anthology editors actually say that. The poet is John Allen Wyeth, and you've never heard of that poet, nor should you. You're not missing anything. But our editors certainly say otherwise. One of them in particular, this isn't signed, but this is certainly the work of one editor who has this poet in mind and always has. Wyeth wrote This Man's Army about World War I. It's American World War I poetry. And I want to read you a bit here. Wyeth's literary importance rests solely on one remarkable and neglected book of poems, This Man's Army, which came out in 1928. This striking, naturalistic sonnet sequence chronicles the movements of an American troop division from receiving sailing orders and embarkation in France through the battles across the Western Front. With slangy dialogue and vivid descriptions, the poems present a war in brief, memorable scenes. Wyeth's poems are also technically innovative. For the book-length sequence, he creates a new rhyme scheme based on the Petrarchan sonnet, but better adapted to the paucity of English language rhymes. While formal, Wyeth's language is as fresh, varied, and contemporary as that of the most free-verse poets of the period. Wyeth's sonnets have the narrative vitality and stark realism of prose, but with the concision and lyricality of poetry. There is nothing quite like This Man's Army elsewhere in modern American poetry. It is comparable in scope and quality to the best British poetry from the Great War. Long neglected, it deserves careful reassessment. That is not true. None of that is true, especially not in comparison with the great British poets of World War I. This is panty-waist kid stuff compared to even second-rate efforts by some of those great poets. So none of that is true. This does not compare with any of the great, not just British, but any of the great World War I poetry. This is a fairly inept poet. He's just a pet project of one of the editors. No idea which one. But I want to read you one. They give us a few of his poems. I'll read you one of those. We should at least do that, especially since John Allen Wyeth represents our dropping off point. This is the end of the first section of this book, and the sections are only going to get more dire as we go on for Poetry Thursday. So I'll read you one of his. It's called War in Heaven, which is going to evoke angels, it's going to evoke Milton, but it's actually planes overhead fighting in World War I. And he starts off so many of the poems in this book. In his book, he starts off so many of the poems with John Dos Passos style, you are there on the ground in the minute, dialogue-heavy moments snapped of enlisted men. That's what we get before we move on here. This came out in 1928. A reek of steam. The bathhouse rang with cries. Come across with the soap. Like hell, what makes you think it's yours? Don't turn off the water, that ain't fair. I'm all covered with soap. Hurry up, get out of the way. Thank God you're taking a bath. This is poetry. This is a poem you're supposed to be saying. Thank God you're taking a bath. He wants to surprise us. Oh, that is so. Well, anyway, I don't stink like you. Air raid in italics. We ran into the square, naked and cold like souls on Judgment Day. Over us, white clouds blazoned on blue skies and a green balloon on fire. We watched it shrink into flame and a fall of smoke. Around us, brute guns belching puffs of shrapnel in the air, where one plane, swooping like a bird of prey, spat fire into the dangling parachute. So, okay, so you can see this is Leonardo da Vinci's The Battle of Anghiari, brought into wretched prose. So the first half of that is enlisted men who are, arguing over who's got the soap and who's taking too long in the pull string shower that they get once a week on the battlefield or whatnot. And then that is interrupted by planes, by warplanes strafing the grounds. The balloon that is on fire is a lookout dirigible, pinioned over the battlefield. That is the first thing that, enemy attackers would fight. They might strafe the ground. So the second half is that. The second half is a rather good, it's a rather poetic, no pun intended, description of what that might be like. You can easily picture the naked enlisted men running out still with soap lather on them because they've been told to present. It's an air raid. They've been told to go to their stations, whether they've got clothing on or not. That part is good. If this were a whole poem that were relatively controlled and not so unbelievably condescending, if it were a whole poem like that, it might be good. But instead, it's got these novelistic elements that have nothing at all to do with poetry. no connection to it at all. If you are a frustrated novelist, and Wyeth certainly was a frustrated novelist, you might do that kind of crap. But in order to do it, you have to abandon any idea of metrics or scansion, any idea of anything like that. You have to abandon poetry in order to do that. And what do we call something that abandons all poetry in order to achieve its dramatic effects and then insists that it is poetry? We refer to that as modern poetry, especially modern American poetry. And we're about to go there. We're about to drop off the continental shelf, because that Wyeth poem is the last part. The next part of the book is early modernism, from imagism to high modernism. OMG. Oh my God. This is going to be rough. So we're gonna do our best. We're gonna see what we see. But that is most of our common leafy days for Poetry Thursday are, I think, over. And one figure from around this period that we haven't hit yet, I'm not really studying ahead in this book, but if we've hit Robert Frost and we're doing World War I, the one figure that we haven't hit yet that will probably be coming up is Wallace Stevens. And Wallace Stevens at least is readable, so we will see. We will see. We will see. I will not prejudge. So that's your poem for today. Hey man, pass the soap. Oh no, it's an air raid. Right, great. Okay, guess you had to be there. So does this mean that we are approaching you had to be there school of American poetry, which is now the only kind of poetry anywhere in the world, not just in America, but anywhere else except maybe Ireland? Sometimes Paul Muldoon, sometimes Galway Kinnell used to write, Evan Boland used to write a poem that wasn't, you had to be there. Maybe we'll have a few of those before we get into their heyday. I'm hoping that we get a whole nother section of this book before we get to the dreaded A-bomb event in 1956. I'm hoping that we do. But we're in for rocky roads from Poetry Thursday from now on. So I'll sign off for now. We'll reconvene next Thursday. Thank you, BookTube.